Donald Trump is collapsing with young voters, and it could be a problem for Republicans for decades. So far in 2026, I've been a little skeptical of some of the polling around Trump's approval rating. Yes, some pollsters have shown it dropping, but we've seen this movie enough times. Major pollsters have shown Trump's support cratering, only for reality to set in and show that that was a bit overblown. And the fact that some of the pollsters showing Trump dropping the most, like CNN or CBS, also have some of the biggest polling misses in recent years, doesn't help. But over the course of the spring, the preponderance of evidence, especially from high-quality pollsters like New York Times, Siena, and Fox News, has become impossible to ignore. Donald Trump is now at or past his highest unpopularity ever. Real Clear Politics' average of polls shows him in a worse position than after the January 6th attack, and his disapproval rating at an all-time high. The Silver Bulletin average shows him in an even worse position. And for the first time, his second-term approval is now in a clearly worse position than his first. Not an enormous difference, but a clear one. And while Trump has lost ground in basically every subgroup in the electorate, this drop is driven by one group more than any other: young voters. Trump is now in a substantially worse position among the youngest parts of the electorate than he was at this point in his first term. And that can have huge implications for 2026, for 2028, and potentially make the youngest Americans consistent Democratic voters for generations. Now, this is all especially notable given that young voters moving towards Trump was one of the biggest narratives of the 2024 election. Even after all the coconut memes and brat summer posting, Trump broke through a wall with the youngest voters. Exit polls show this really clearly. From 2020 to 2024, Kamala Harris lost the most ground among millennials and Gen Z, a net double-digit loss. In fact, Harris won voters born in the 90s and 2000s by half the margin Joe Biden did, and about a third of the margin Hillary Clinton did. All of that combined to make Harris's performance among young people the worst for Democrats since at least 2004. And that mattered both practically, it shattered a core part of Democrats' modern coalition, and spiritually. Young people are a symbol of the future, of where the country is moving. They're more diverse, more college educated, more cosmopolitan, and to a lot of people on the left, the fact that they were consistently Democratic leaning in good political years and bad was validation of the idea that they were going to win the long-term battle.
I think Gen Z is very, very engaged. I think they're going to save the world.
Trump's 2024 performance seemed to ruin that whole narrative. But now, that performance looks more and more like a fluke. According to polling from The Economist and YouGov, Trump's approval rating among 18 to 29-year-olds has dropped a net 47 points since his inauguration. Polling from Atlas Intel puts it even worse, a net 60-point drop. And pollsters all over are finding this now. An ABC News Washington Post poll finds 70% of those under 30 disapprove of Trump, compared to 27% who approve. And New York Times Siena, probably the best poll in the game right now, finds him even worse. 19% approve, 72% disapprove. Those are catastrophic. And significantly, they're worse than this point in his first term. Now, there are two big reasons this really matters for the 2026 midterms and beyond. But first, let's narrow down what's actually driving these. To me, there's maybe three big things at play here. First, economic dissatisfaction. You look at any poll on the economy, and Americans are absurdly pessimistic about the current situation. And young people have been at the forefront of that. And that's actually kind of weird. For decades, young people were consistently more optimistic about the economic future than everyone else. Look at this chart. The green bars are when young people had more positive feelings about the economy than the country as a whole. In 2024 and 2025, that went consistently negative for the first time in recorded history. Now that's kind of snapped back over the past couple months. Young people are now right around where the rest of the country is. But that's not because young people have gotten more optimistic. It's that everyone else has gotten more negative. Now, some people, fairly, point out that that's a bit weird, given the youth unemployment rate right now is pretty good in historical terms. And the misery index, which is the term for inflation plus unemployment, is also low in historical terms. On the other hand, there's not nothing here. Inflation is still higher than it's traditionally been in recent decades. And as a result, the Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates higher than they've been for most of the 21st century, which makes it harder to borrow money, harder to get a mortgage, harder for businesses to spend and hire people. And that combination is, one, the opposite of what millennials had after the Great Recession, when both inflation and interest rates were super low. And two, that combination is something that hits young people especially hard. They're the group with the fewest savings, the least tied up in the stock market, the most career volatility, the most likely to work entry-level jobs, which are facing a real threat from AI. And they're the most likely to rent and face by far the highest barriers to homeownership. It's not crazy. And here's the thing, everyone else now seems to agree that things are bad. Trump's approval rating on the economy has dropped more than any other issue during his presidency. about a net 40 points, according to the Silver Bulletin polling average. People hate Trump's economy right now, which, again, is way different from his first term. Even during the COVID pandemic, when the economy was at its worst point, it was still his strongest issue. In October 2020, Gallup found a majority of Americans approved of his handling of it. A Marist poll that same month found that it was the only issue he was even close to Joe Biden on. The fact that he's collapsed this much on this issue, which affects young people in a huge way, goes a long way to explain why young voters have soured on him. Second thing at play: non-white voters. This is a huge part of the discussion of young voters that often gets overlooked. Every generation in America is now more racially diverse and less white than the one before. So big movements among non-white voters are naturally going to play out among the youngest voters, and vice versa. And we already saw that in 2024. According to Catalyst, one of the most reliable exit poll analysts, in 2024, Trump gained 4 points among white voters under 30, and 4 points among black voters under 30, but 9 points among Asian voters under 30, and 12 among Latinos under 30. And those were driven by even larger gains among younger non-white men. So the point is, in the election, Trump gained with young people when he also gained with non-white people. And as president, he's lost ground with young people while he's also lost ground with non-white people. There's really no way to spin it. Trump has fallen off a cliff with non-white voters, especially Latinos. Take the New York Times Siena poll, which, again, is basically the best poll out there. In April 2025, it found 59% of Latinos disapproving of Trump and 36% approving. Not great, but not insanely terrible. And actually still much better than other Republicans' traditional performance with Latinos. Fast forward to May 2026, and it's now 71% disapprove and 20% approve. And here, it's not hard to see the effect of Trump's immigration policies, his diversity policies, his pretty open hostility to non-white people in government. You can go on. Think whatever you want about all that stuff, but it's clearly reversed the progress he's made with non-white voters, and by extension, has hurt him among the most diverse age group: young people. And finally, the third thing that could be going on here. Young people are incredibly anti-establishment, and Trump has become the establishment. This is maybe the most important thing to know about young voters' political outlook now. There is just a deep, abiding skepticism of institutions, elites, and authorities in general. I actually wrote about this for my old newsletter in early 2025, exploring the idea that Trump's anti-establishment vibe and Biden and Harris's pro-establishment vibe created a perfect storm to move young voters rightward. The more time that passes, the more I actually think that was right about a lot of what went on in the 2024 election. But in the time since, that dynamic has now reversed. Not only is Trump the incumbent president and his party the majority party in DC, which makes them the authority, the establishment, the ones in charge, but he's made a bunch of intentional choices that have destroyed his claim to being anti-establishment. He completely botched the Epstein files. His signature legislative achievement is a bill that primarily benefits rich people. And most importantly, he's launched the US into another major war in the Middle East. Wherever you stand, it's like he's gone out of his way to emulate the mistakes of past presidents, like Joe Biden or George Bush, and allow an impression to sink in of him being an elite establishment figure, which, by the way, is exactly what we talked about on this channel last year. Go check out our video. Not to brag, but I think it warned of exactly what's going on right now. And that's the kind of thing you'll always see if you're subscribed. So make sure to subscribe to the channel and to my newsletter. And here's the thing, that anti-establishment disconnect is also playing out within the Republican Party itself. Congressman Thomas Massie, one of the rare Republicans who hasn't blindly fallen in line with Trump on every issue, recently lost his primary, which was a big flex for Trump, who tried really hard to defeat him. But that whole saga also provided some evidence that the youngest Republicans are maybe beginning to move on from Trump. One of the last polls of that primary, which came really close to the final results, showed that Massie was losing in a landslide among the oldest Republicans, but winning among the youngest. And other polls show a similar dynamic. A May poll from Echelon Insights showed that both J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio are weakest among the youngest Republicans, and that group is also the most likely to support people like Robert Kennedy Jr., who was a Democrat until 10 seconds ago, or Tucker Carlson, who's becoming a fierce critic of the Trump administration. That is a real warning sign for the next generation of Republican candidates. So why does all this matter? Two reasons. First is the short term. Young people can play a really decisive role in elections. We saw this really strongly in the 2018 midterms, when young voters turned out at record numbers and supported Democrats by a big margin. Look at that change. Millennial turnout more than doubled from the 2014 to 2018 midterms. And that cycle was the first time ever that Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z outvoted Boomers. And that not only turned out, They voted for Democrats at a historic 2-to-1 margin, a better margin than even for Obama in 2008. That absolutely made the difference in a lot of close races, and it was a key ingredient in the 2018 blue wave. This year, Trump is in an even worse position with young people, and if it stays that way, we could be looking at a similar result. And second is the long term. For a long time, some political scientists have argued that voters' first elections play a really important role in the socio-political formation of voting habits. Basically meaning that the candidates in the first elections you vote in and who you choose to vote for in those elections can determine your political allegiance for decades. This is often referred to as the impressionable years thesis, and there's some real evidence that there's something to it. For example, Generation X came of age during the Reagan years and the Republican dominance of the 80s and early 90s, and they're now, consistently, the most Republican-leading generation. Millennials came of age during the disaster of George Bush's presidency, and then under Obama, and they've become consistently Democratic-leaning. Now, this isn't a foolproof thesis, and it's definitely still early, but there's some real risk that Trump could be radicalizing a whole generation against him, his policies, and his party. For him, that doesn't matter much. He'll be gone from the presidency sooner than it feels right now. But for his party, that could be a lasting problem. And unless they change something quickly, it's only becoming more likely. What do you think is the biggest reason young people have turned on Trump? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and my newsletter. And while you're at it, check out this new doc on the underground peptide economy from TNM, the Recount sister company.